All right, great. So I'm here with Paul Murphy from Lightspeed. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So we're at Italian Tech Week, and yeah, it's became like kind of a who's who of the tech scene. We just saw Doug Leone from Sequoia. I think tomorrow Jeff Bezos coming and Ursula von der Leyen. So I was curious, like, what brought you to this event, and what brings you to Italy?
Yeah, so we're Lightspeed is we have a relatively large fund, but we're actually a very small team. And in Europe, we have three investors. So we have to be really thoughtful about where we go when we go to events. And basically, the rule of thumb is whenever there's high enough concentration of kind of interesting people, founders, investors, then we'll say, all right, let's go there. We can like meet a bunch of interesting people at one time. But you don't see us at a lot of the big tech events for that reason.
Yeah, makes sense. And are you investing in Italy? Have you made investments in Italy or in Italian founders?
So in Italy, not yet. I think we're realizing that there is more distribution of founders in Europe than we thought. So I'm spending a lot of time in Spain, made a few investments there. We'll spend more time in Italy. I'm sure that will result in something at some point. But we did just back an Italian founder, Francesco's Proxima Fusion. So I know he spends a lot of time here.
Yeah, totally. So that actually brings me to like the next topic. So there are a lot of Doug Leone said that he was actually born in Italy and moved when he was 11. But yeah, there are great Italian founders all over the world. And data that I presented yesterday showed actually that Italy has a very high percentage of emigrated founders, whereas Italian startups, their teams are very Italy dominant, so there are not a lot of immigrant founders. So in other words, Italy is very kind of domestically oriented. It does have a lot of very successful startups, surprisingly high number of 100 million plus revenue companies actually also built here. But it's kind of, yeah, not really connected as some other places like Sweden. And so I kind of made the case that EU Inc., this initiative, is especially relevant for Italy. But I was curious what's your view on this initiative? Is it ever going to happen? Is it realistic? What do you think?
I think it's an amazing initiative. We signed, the support for it. I think the reality is, in Europe, it's still very complicated to set up a company, to fund a company. It's expensive and time consuming for angel investors to participate in those companies. Stock options are complicated. So I think that the more we can do to simplify it, yeah, the better it's going to be for everyone.
Yeah, because actually we kind of skipped over this because you are an American by origin, and I guess it must have been kind of a shock for you initially to see how complicated things can get here to just invest some seed money into a startup.
I remember when I made my first angel investment in a German startup.
Yeah.
And I could not, I think I spent £500 on fees just to get the documents certified, before I even made the investment. And it took about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it was incredibly complicated. But yeah, that was a surprise. There's other markets, other countries, which aren't that complicated.
So let's switch tack a little bit from Italy and EU Inc. to you as an investor. And maybe not everybody knows who you are. So can you tell us a little bit about like how you got into investing and what did you do before?
So I'm kind of in like the third phase of my career. The first phase, I was an engineer. I worked at Microsoft in the DevTools division.
Yep.
And I ended up being on product and strategy teams, moving around the world, but spent almost 8 years at Microsoft. I then became a founder of a number of companies. Two of them became successful enough to raise capital and ultimately sell the business. So I was co-founder of a GIF search engine called Giphy, and which Lightspeed invested in, and also a game studio called Dots, which we ended up selling to Take-Two Interactive.
And Giphy was sold to Facebook, right?
Yeah, sold to Facebook. And then right after that, strangely, both companies sold around the same time. And I'm very open about this with founders, I was like candidly extremely burnt out.
Yep.
And one of my investors, which was a guy named Per Jorgen at Northzone, called me and said, "Do you want to hang out with us?
Yeah.
you can come to London and do some venture partner type work. And so I did that, fell in love with it almost immediately. And I've been investing since. That's been about 8 years. Initially with Northzone, and then I moved over to Lightspeed about 4 years ago.
Okay. Okay. And Lightspeed in the deal room power law ranking was ranked like very high, both in EMEA, but also in the US, so actually on both rankings. So I was curious, what do you think are kind of the strategies that led to this, that lead to those performances?
Yeah, I mean, the most important one is that we are an early stage investment fund. That's our DNA. And so as our funds have grown, we've taken, and I mean, I credit the founders of the fund, they took a lot of credit or a lot of focus in making sure that we stay in early stage kind of as our entry point. And then
How early?
I mean, we were the first 500K check into Snapchat, first investors in Navan. There's a pretty long list of companies that, in fact, there's some where we literally sat down with the founders and said, what do you want to build? And even Mistral, I mean, we committed to Mistral before a company was formed.
Right.
So it's, that's kind of like where we like to spend our time and our focus. So that means we tend to really kind of over-index on founders and to some extent product if they've built something. And then after that, I think what our team has been particularly good at, we have a really awesome reinvestment team and I think one of the best growth teams in the industry, is they take a look at our active portfolio and they make an independent call. These are the companies that we think we should double down on. And so it kind of removes us as the deal lead because we always have a bias. We love our companies. And I think being able to get that right has meant that a lot of our growth funds kind of get concentrated into our early stage investments. And I think that's generally probably a good recipe for some level of success.
Right. So it's a bit different as a multi-stage fund, let's say. It's like more separated. Is that fair to say, or do all multi-stage
I actually
funds?
think it's the opposite.
Okay.
I think we really operate as a single team.
Right.
If we have an early stage investment that we think will need a lot of capital over time, we'll proactively bring people from our growth team into that early stage meeting, because we want to sort of make sure that when we underwrite it early, that it's attractive late. And even when we prosecute deals, growth stage that are in a certain sector, if I've got domain expertise, they'll ask me to come along. And so we operate kind of as one Lightspeed.
Okay. And earlier on stage, you mentioned that, you back founders, you're people driven, I guess, but you also mentioned that you like infrastructure layer, you like kind of boring technologies. Does that have something to do with your success?
Yeah, I think I mean, for sure, Lightspeed was started, doing enterprise application investing and infrastructure. So we had some great wins in security, various levels, various layers of the enterprise stack. And I think that's carried through now. I think when we find highly technical founders building something that is kind of infrastructure or enterprise focused, they tend to want to talk to us. Whereas I feel like on the consumer side, we're relevant, but we have to maybe work a bit harder. Hey, we're consumer investors as well. So we're kind of building that muscle, but I'd say the enterprise is like our core.
Okay, got it. I saw one of your tweets that you also invest yourself, and and you mentioned that crypto actually is one of the outperformers in your portfolio.
Yeah.
I was curious about how do you feel about that, and how do you think about crypto?
So the funny thing is, the reason I invested in crypto into some funds is because I didn't feel like I understood it well enough.
Right.
And I felt like what I did understand is that it was going to be fundamental to the future of how we transact. And I felt like I just had to get closer to it. And so, I studied as much as I could, but I thought, who are the smartest people I know that are doing this today? And let me get closer to them. And so that's what I did. But the funny thing is, I don't know where the ultimate performance will land, but the returns happen a lot faster in kind of blockchain crypto funds than in traditional venture.
Got it. All right. Last question. So, what are things that you think people are not talking about enough that they should be talking more about?
I think security in the enterprise is a massive challenge that there's a lot of people that are thinking about it,
Right.
but we are like not even like the very very beginnings of what needs to be developed.
You're also thinking about geopolitical and or
Well, I think it starts with where your data is and who's using your data. So I think there's a sovereignty component to that. If you're going to send a bunch of data to a server, you want to make sure that it's secure along the way, it's secure when it gets there, it's not training your competitors' data. That's kind of like layer zero. But I think beyond that, you've got information, even within large enterprises where it's traditionally, it's somewhat siloed, but by design. You don't want everyone in the company to know everything.
no.
But if now everyone in the company does know everything because there's a model that's been trained on everything, what does that do to the kind of your sort of way of thinking about security and protecting data? So there's just a lot of things to figure out. So that's an area that we're spending a lot of time on at Lightspeed.
Nice. All right. Thanks a lot for doing this. It
bet.
was great. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Cheers.